Well, as I've said, I'm so delighted to see all of you tonight. It is so great. It's seeing the group back like this. It's really more light at the end of a very long tunnel. So it's good to see you. I wanted to introduce our program tonight, which is an analysis of the 2020 election and in Iowa and recommendations for a path forward. This was done by Roseanne Cook, Sarah Prinius, Emily Silliman, and Janice Weiner. They interviewed over 30 people and came to some really salient conclusions. So I'm very much looking forward to the program tonight. After our presentation, we'll be asking all of you for suggestions for what we can do to take back Iowa. Roseanne, I believe, am I correct that you are starting us off? Or is it Sarah?
I think it might be me, actually.
Oh,
Janice.
Sorry, I'm muted. Yes, it is Janice.
All right.
So I'm just going to introduce our project and how we went about it and how it came to be. Essentially, it started as Roseanne and me texting the night of November 3rd saying, oh my God, the national scene looks okay, but Iowa looks disastrous. What can we do? And what can maybe we can do something as Potluck Insurgency because we're relatively small and we can be nimble, unlike say the state Democratic Party, which is going to do their own reports and other groups, but we can just get going. So the steering committee was kind enough to appoint essentially the four of us to work on this. We interviewed from the beginning of December through about the end of February, I think 32 individuals and groups. There were grassroots groups, county parties, get out the vote organizations, and a whole variety of candidates, some successful, some not successful. Although in our view, everybody's successful in terms of starting to make inroads in their area and learning about the politics of their area, as well as two former chairs of the Iowa Democratic Party. We put together, Roseanne did a masterful job of putting together lists of questions. We sent out questions in advance so that they could think about them and that we would have a structured way to approach this. And we had different sets of questions for different groups. And the interviews generally went an hour, sometimes a little more. I will say that we had a fabulous time. You know, you think you're doing this twice a week, you get tired of it, but then we start talking to the next person, and whether it was J.D. Schulten in Northwest Iowa, or somebody who ran Mary who ran in the short special election in January, or Ruby who ran in Benton and Iowa counties, or Kayla up in the Decorah area, and Kevin Kinney, we just had fascinating conversations. So Roseanne and Emily were kind enough to be our scribes throughout this. And then we went through the process of writing a report, drawing conclusions, and putting an appendix to it as well. Our real hope is that this will be actionable, that this is not just going to be a report that will sit on somebody's shelf or on their computer file and gather dust or virtual dust, but that we will be able to, we and others will consider our suggestions and to the extent possible, put them to use, put them to work so that we can start to take back seats and build the Democratic Party in the state. And so that's sort of my pitch for this, and I will hand it off, I believe, to Sarah. Yeah, Sarah.
Yep, I'm on. Thanks all for joining us tonight. Just reiterating what Janice said, we really enjoyed this process. It was because there were so many different perspectives. You know, we were hearing from the candidates and from officials and people kind of at the top of the food chain, and lots of, you know, grassroots activists. So a lot of what we find, I think, is going to be relevant to our group. But I want to just pull out some of the main themes that we saw across all of those groups and people that we were talking to. I'm just gonna go right on through that. The first thing, one of the things we found is that it's important to go local. Basically, as volunteers and activists, it's really important for us to be active on the local level, even if in our neighborhoods, in our across the street neighbor, where we need to be showing up as Democrats, engaging in discussions with people, reaching out to friends and relatives. And in a little bit, I'm going to talk about relational organizing, which is one kind of way of going local with our project. The next thing we found was that we generally have excellent candidates who are good fits for their district. They know their districts. We need to listen to them and let them lead. We found that a lot of what happens with the Democratic Party in Iowa is very top down, and we need to bring it down to the candidate level and really listen to people. Another, probably the biggest theme that we saw was that we need to reframe our messaging. We are right now really stuck responding to Republican taunts about, the fact that Democrats are baby killers and gun grabbers and socialists. We need to have clear responses ready to combat those talking points. And part of that is getting out ahead on issues and learning how to reframe. Like, framing is a rhetorical skill that we need to learn. And some of it is reclaiming some of that language that Republicans have co-opted, things like patriotism and liberty and freedom. And so we really need to be working with people who know what they're doing in terms of communications. And we have people like that in our own communities that we can call on for help with that. Another big one, and I'm going to address this a little bit more when I talk about relational organizing, but we need to ditch the coordinated campaign. And that's like the big infrastructure of elections and campaigning that we see kick into action every 2 years here. And like, you all made phone calls this cycle, how bad it was. And every 2 years we hear that it needs to be fixed. This time it has to be different. Like, we have got to reshape how we're doing things at that level to win back, especially to win back the state house, because our state, people running for representative and state senate were just left out of this process in really ways that obviously were very disappointing in the results. So yes, getting out the vote is still really important, but we have to use our resources better, and we have to have better data and better vote turnout, bottom line. Another big conclusion we reached was, or a big theme that we saw emerging, was that many of the people we talked to felt that the VAN, the voter access network, is broken. So this is the Democrats' database of voter information, and it's taken from the auditor. So it's like everybody who's registered to vote, and it's improved supposedly by campaigns. So as they contact people, they enter the data about the people they're talking to, and supposedly improving the database. But the VAN is in terrible shape. At least 30% of voters in the VAN are missing contact information. So that's 30% of the people that we are not able to talk to. It also completely misses anybody who's like a reluctant voter, who isn't registered or who's been purged from the voting lists. And that's a lot of people. So we really need to figure out how to fix that database. Another thing that we need to do, and I think everybody repeated this, is year-round organizing. Right now we have these boom or bust cycles of organizing, where an election is happening and we have organizers in the field and we have volunteers engaged, and we go, and then it all kind of falls apart until the next cycle comes around again. And this is not a robust way of being Democrats and being organized in Iowa. So we really need to look at having paid organizers who can help us get county parties and activist groups like ours organized, especially, like, it's, fine, in Iowa City we can do that, but in those tough red areas we need that ongoing engagement with voters. And one way to do this year-round organizing, even if there aren't elections going on, there are certainly issues that people care about. So we can really do some issues-based organizing in lots of areas around the state. The other thing that's really good about doing it that way is what's an important issue here, like say the funding of education, is not going to be have the same importance in a rural district where, say, a rural aging district, you tell them about funding education and they say, you're going to raise my property taxes, aren't you? So we can look at issues that are important in different areas. We do need to value every candidate. We mentioned somebody like Ruby Bodeker, who's running in deep red area, fantastic candidate. We just have to support those people. We know they're probably not going to win, but they need our support. They could do a lot of great work in party building and in making Democrats in those areas feel seen and valued. Another interesting thing that we saw was women. Women support women. We were seeing time and time again that so many grassroots groups are women-led, women-driven. I don't think it's a coincidence that the 4 of us who did this debrief project were all women. Of the people we talked to, 21 were women and 13 were men. We really see a lot of women engaging with the political process, and we need to acknowledge that and empower women as we continue. Another thing we saw across the board was that money was really not an issue for Democrats in this cycle. We were, the early money was there, and people were able to reach out to funding sources both within Iowa and outside Iowa. So we know that we can raise money, and that's something we have to continue to do as we go forward. And finally, the last thing, as Democrats, we have values. We care about people. We respect people's differences. We care about the future. We care about what happens in this state. We should never apologize for that. And we should be reiterating to people that one of the things Democrats stand for is good governance, that government is a force for good in people's lives. Trump was an attempt to just totally debase government. We're rebuilding now. We have to be proud of that work and really make that work transparent to people, that that's what we stand for. So that's kind of the overview. I think Emily now is going to take all that and kind of apply it directly to the Potluck Insurgency and what we do.
Hi, good evening. Yeah, so actually what I want to do is talk about grassroots groups in general, but yes, all this applies to Potluck Insurgency as a grassroots group. We heard many interesting things about running for office in deep red areas. And as it turns out, in Johnson County, we have some precincts and townships that are turning redder. Big Grove in the Solon area was mentioned as an example. Some legislative districts have become redder, even in areas that were formerly pretty competitive for the Democrats. I'm thinking Muscatine as an example. So what do we do as a grassroots group? People told us that it isn't that effective for us to just phone into red districts during election time. That is not particularly effective. Fundraisers for candidates in redder districts are okay, but helping candidates raise funds in their own district seemed like a better idea than just holding fundraisers in Johnson County. Several people mentioned that whenever we do something outside of Johnson County, relationship building should be the primary focus. We might get involved with only 1 or 2 legislative districts outside of Johnson County, but we would build strong relationships, start earlier, and help that area do some party building, not just the specific campaign. We might start in our own backyard and get involved in the redder parts of Johnson County. Redistricting will change boundaries, but one thing we know for sure is that North Liberty has doubled in size since the last census. And so that will, there's a lot of voters up there, and how well are we communicating with them? So what would some of this activity look like? People suggested engaging with voters in off years by focusing on local races. Maybe some of us with experience with school board campaigns could meet with someone who wants to run for school board in a nearby red area. Maybe a city council candidate could use some talking points for the campaign trail. Democrats can hold forums and discuss issues. The League of Women Voters and other organizations hold forums, but Republican legislators increasingly don't show up. And then sometimes the whole event gets canceled. So Democrats need to do more of their own forums. And in this case, it would be okay. People were telling us it would be okay if some of the people presenting at the forum came from Johnson County. You know, we're showing up personally and engaging on an issue, which is a whole lot different than a phone call. When we choose issues to discuss with voters, we can take on highly partisan issues such as guns. You know, no, we're not going to take away your guns, and to try to counter some of the right-wing messaging. Alternatively, we could focus on less partisan issues such as soil conservation or corporate monopolies in agriculture. Although it was pointed out that if we don't know the first thing about agriculture, we wouldn't be the one, I wouldn't be the one talking about it. We can borrow the barnstorming idea from Kayla Cater, who was one of the candidates we interviewed, and just simply hold a discussion with voters about what they want Democrats to focus on. I mean, that's just there's different concepts for how you might use a chance at a forum. Democrats can do more projects that aren't political at all, such as cleaning up a highway. If we do service projects as Democrats, we would do service projects as Democrats, and that would improve visibility. Hawk the Vote, a campus voter education group, mentioned that in the past election, students were caught at home with no working printer when they had to print out their absentee ballot request form. We should talk to other groups on a regular basis because Potluck members in that last election and in that situation might have enjoyed printing out absentee ballot request forms. I have a working printer, and mailing them to students at their home addresses. And I mentioned absentee ballot requests. Now that the auditors are prohibited from mailing those out, that's actually going to be a bigger issue in the coming cycle than you would imagine. So that the idea is that, if we're in touch with other groups, there's a job that the students don't have time to do, but we do. We can, if we talked to the Cedar County Democrats regularly, we might find that they need help or opening a headquarters. They opened a headquarters on their own this past cycle when the state party didn't want to open headquarters. But many people talked about how organizing earlier in the cycle is so important, not waiting for the campaign season. Maybe a low dollar fundraiser would help that get that headquarters open sooner. If, for instance, we hear from the Cedar County Democrats that they could use that help. I'm just using this as an example. It's all about relationships. Democrats need help with year-round messaging, as Sarah mentioned. Maybe groups like ours could look for good billboard locations and get some messages up. Money in your pocket, shots in your arm, vote Democrat. I'm not the ideal person to come up with the appropriate slogan, but you get the idea. We could make some good bumper stickers and help Democrats in red areas get them onto cars. We can look for opportunities to train volunteers. I have spun some ideas here that came out of our interviews, but this group, Potluck Insurgency, and the people who come to our events, this group has a lot of talented people in it, and you may have some great ideas or particular relationships that you can build on that might lead to a good project for this group. So feel free to get creative.
Okay, thank you, Emily. This is Roseanne, and I'm sorry, my lighting is a little strange. I'm waiting for the sun to go down and then my lighting will be a little bit better. So yeah, we wanted to talk a little bit about, what Potluck Insurgency might do going forward. I did want to mention that if you have a chance to look at our report, which I hope you will take a look at, we did put an appendix on it that breaks out recommendations for various parts of the democratic infrastructure in Iowa. And you might be interested in taking a look at that. We have quite a few recommendations for the IDP, the Iowa Democratic Party. We also have a set of very robust recommendations for the Truman Fund and the Senate Majority Fund. We have recommendations for candidates, recommendations for county parties, and recommendations for grassroots groups. And so even if you don't want to read the whole report, which I admit is thorough and a little long, you might at least take a look at our conclusion and the appendix and look at the recommendations. That might be an interesting piece to look at. So the steering committee met a week or so ago when we were preparing for tonight, and we talked a little bit about some ideas that, whether there were any ideas that we might have for the group to consider. So I guess before I turn it over to all of you to share ideas about activities and speakers and projects, I want to give Jane, Sarah, and Ed a couple of minutes or a few minutes to talk about some of the ideas that we came up with. And I think Jane is going to talk first about some letter writing that she has been working on. So Jane, you want to talk about that a little bit as a possible project?
Yes, I'm very excited about this. You've heard that messaging is one of the main themes of things that we could work on. And I think at least that's something I've been thinking throughout the campaign. It's very difficult because so many of us who made phone calls, people screen their calls. People are often not home. People fast forward through ads. It's very difficult to connect with the people who might be switching to Democrat. They might be independents. They might be moderate Republicans. And it's very hard for us to get that message to them. So one of the things that we're working on is getting letter writing out in newspapers, as guest columnists, as letters to the editor, letters to congressmen or elected officials. And we have somebody who would like to work with us on that. And that is Amy Adams, who is on the staff of several NGOs. And in each of them, I know for one of them is Progress Iowa. She's also on the board of Indivisible Iowa. And that's what she does, is help people write letters. So she'll help us edit them. She'll give us topics and fact sheets. I've seen her presentation and it's excellent. So she'll be a really great resource for us. So if you're somebody who has opinions, and I assume that's why you're here, and would be willing to put them on paper, we'd love to have you as part of the group. I should say we are also doing this in conjunction with the Johnson County Democrats. So if you are interested in that, please give me your name either in the chat, or you can email me at jane-cranston@uiowa.edu. And we're going to pull together and get a meeting, and then we'll decide as a group how we want to proceed. So get me that information, and I hope we have a high level of interest. I'd love it if we, right now, the Republicans, at least in a lot of parts of the state, they vastly outnumber us on this sort of communication. And I would love it if we would be the ones to take that over for the next election. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jane. And so I think you're seeing Jane's email over there in chat, or you can just pop up with a chat that says, yes, I'm interested in writing letters to the editor or opinion columns. And we're going to save the chat, so we would be able to get that from the chat also. And Jane is taking notes, I should mention as well.
Yes, I will take notes, but if you would like me to get a thorough sense of what it is that you want to say, please email me with, whatever it is. We'd like to have a compilation of what we come up with tonight. So I will take notes, but I'm sure it'll be brief. And if you want it to be very thorough and more accurate, then please shoot me an email with what you want to say.
Great, good. Thank you, Jane. And then Sarah mentioned earlier that she was going to talk a little bit more about relational organizing tonight to see if there might be people in this group who are interested in learning more about that. So Sarah?
Sure thing. Janice just texted me. She said, I want a billboard. Money in your pocket, shots in arms. Thank you, Democrat. Yes, that's what I want too. This really builds on what Jane was talking about, which is, we're solidifying our thoughts about messaging. How do we get the message out to people? How do we connect to people? And especially in this time when people feel really divided from each other, how do we bring people back together? So yeah, I'm going to talk a bit about relational organizing, which is kind of an old model made new again, thanks to some technology advances. So looking at the most recent election and looking at how organizing worked during 2020, you guys made phone calls, you were sort of either deeply involved in the whole process or sort of peripherally involved as a volunteer. So basically the model that you were seeing was that campaigns were asking activist groups like ours and like Eastside Democrats pre-COVID to knock doors, but this time to make phone calls. And this whole operation is led by paid organizers who are usually highly motivated, smart, awesome young people from out of state. The problem with this model, there are many problems actually with this model, and this is what we talked about it when we're talking about the coordinated campaign and this model of organizing. It happens only during the campaign cycle for a single purpose, to get a candidate elected. So it's not about party building. It's not about finding out who the Democrats are beyond calling them targets that we want to get out to vote. It's very, very top down, and it's very data driven with bad data. As I mentioned before, the Voter Access Network, the VAN, is missing information on 30% of our voters. We have no way to contact them. And also the VAN is missing completely the people who aren't voters. So that over attention, over focus on voter turnout means we're just missing a huge number of people. As you all know, if you made phone calls, the scripts that are used in this organizing project are inauthentic modes of communication. They are wordy, you recite them, they even skip some of the local candidates we didn't even talk about hardly Rita Hart, and we certainly didn't talk about our local House candidates in that top-down script. We also know that phone calls in particular are not a good way of reaching people. We had maybe a 3 to 5% contact rate. It's cold calling and it's icy cold. And it's volunteers like us talking to total strangers. So there's no basis of trust established between us. The other problem that we noticed, and I know Roseanne will corroborate this because she and I were both kind of team captains on phone calling, but we were mobilizing people that are not supporters of our candidates because the data was so bad and the data modeling was so bad. We were talking to people who were not going to vote for Rita Hart, for example. So that organizing model is just like a blunt instrument, right? It's just not working well. Relational organizing is a different approach. It's a way of reaching out to our own social networks and engaging people long-term in the political process. So it's not about, I want your vote. It's about, I want you to be part of this. So it relies on the power of existing social networks, and it can be your friends, it could be the people you do water aerobics with, it could be your mechanic, It could be the barista who makes your latte every day, you know, when we have lattes again. So it's about this kind of long-term, looking at your social networks, looking at peer-to-peer communication. The other thing about relational organizing, as I mentioned earlier, is it can be issues-based. It's a way to have substantive conversations, sometimes about just difficult subjects, but about things that really matter to people in their day-to-day lives. So elections, whatever, can seem a little removed, but you know, something like water quality, that can maybe be something that really matters to people in a town that has a boil order on their water every other week. So it really goes beyond voter turnout. It's a year-round model. It's a focus on voter engagement. If it does mean phone calls, it's a much higher contact rate. It's based on real social connections with trusted sources of information. People trust their friends generally. It's using real conversations and not scripts. So it's authentic in that connection. It's also about listening and connecting. One really important thing that it does, relational organizing does, is that it can improve the data, because if you are using, there are certain technological advances that allow us to take those conversations and then enter that data into the van or whatever data thing we end up with, so that, you know, when we do end up turning people out, we actually have the good phone number instead of 5 bad phone numbers. So it can improve the data. The other thing that relational organizing is really good at, and we saw this in Georgia, for example, is it's really good at reaching people who are traditionally disenfranchised voters. So in Georgia, that meant people of color. For Hawk the Vote, it meant millennials or the college students who generally hadn't been engaged in the process. I'm kind of wondering, is this a way to bring in people in rural areas that maybe feel like they're not engaged in the political process? Maybe they're not registered to vote. Maybe they don't bother voting. So it's a way of bringing in people, mobilizing from within instead of from without, like those drop-in organizers. The other thing it does is when we do voter turnout, we're talking to people we know are actually going to support our candidates because we know them. And it also means that we have better modeling on voter behavior. So people are less likely, like, I know, you know, this happened to you when you called people during the last cycle. People lied to you. They said, oh yeah, I'm going to vote for your person. And then they didn't, right? Or they didn't want to talk to you. We get much better idea of who people are actually going to turn out for if you're talking to your friends and neighbors. So that's an overview of kind of the differences between relational organizing and the traditional means we've been using. I had a brief kind of introductory training session with an organization that does training for relational organizing, because it's about a lot more than just like texting your friends. It's more involved than that. And they are willing to do a training session with us. So if you wanted to indicate your interest to Ed, he will put together a list of people who might be interested in doing a training session. I also feel like this is something we could export to the One Iowa group, right? I can't remember what it's called, but the New Iowa group.
New Iowa
Or it's called New Iowa Project. This is something that I suspect they'll be taking up, and we could plug right into that as well. And I think it's something that we could be talking to, say, people, as Emily pointed out, you know, we're losing the northern part of this county, and we could be talking to people in Big Grove and in Solon and trying to expand our reach as Democrats into those areas. So.
All right, thank
Hey,
you,
thanks.
Sarah. Great. So yeah, so if you're interested in relational organizing training, go ahead and say so in chat, or how else can we let you know, Sarah?
Just go ahead, and I think we were going to let Ed know. And
Yeah, you were invited. The email I sent to invite you tonight. Just go ahead and respond to that
yeah,
and say, hey, I want to join Sarah in the relational
Great.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
training.
That was a wonderful account of it, Sarah. Thank you so much. I learned something just by listening to you the last 5 minutes. That was really awesome. And then Ed, you were going to say a couple of words about the new Iowa project in case people are interested in getting involved in that.
Sure. What I did is I did put the 3 links in the chat. So first of all, I put in about the new Iowa project. Now they're getting, basically they're modeling this after the new Georgia project that Stacey Abrams and others were working on for a decade. So the idea with this group is they want to do a similar type of process. They have created 5 committees where they're working. So as far as if you want to find out about the group, it's in the chat. So it's go to that Facebook page. You can find out about the new Iowa project. Then also they have a meeting on Thursday. So that would be another one. Just hop on there and join that meeting on Thursday on the 25th. And then also what you can do is sign up for one of the committees. And as far as the committees, there's 5 of them. And what you can do is go to that URL that's in the chat. Just click on that and just tell which committee you want to sign up for. Actually, I signed up for all 5 committees. And I've been to 4 of their meetings, and they are just phenomenal. So especially the registration and turnout committee, again, that's going to be headed by Sharon Lake and Tara, and as well as Sue Bryant from the Eastside Dems. And you know that they're rock stars in what they've been doing, along with Dave and Donna Langer from, I believe it's Urbandale, and they too have been doing a wonderful job. So then also communications and voter education. I sat in on the data and benchmarking committee. They're really focusing on different groups and getting that data that we've been talking about that has not been good in VAN. That's going to be their focus. So if you care about data, that's going to be your group. And then also the inactive and independent outreach committee. They've already gotten a group of what they call the voters that have been basically disenfranchised by the Republicans. So again, that's what they're about. The community outreach group, I haven't participated in that group yet. So do join one of those groups, just find out what they're up to. And really that's a way to really have some meaningful quality volunteering that you could do immediately with meetings that are coming up right away. So anyone have any questions on that for me? Cool.
Okay, thank you, Ed. So now we want to hear from you. One of the things we heard from a variety of candidates and activists and other folks that we talked to when we did the debrief project was that grassroots groups are critical in Iowa for party building, training, developing volunteers, just all kinds of things that we can do. And a couple of people who were familiar with Potluck Insurgency said, oh, I think there should be a Potluck Insurgency in, every county in Iowa. Now, I don't know about that or about the name insurgency. I don't know how that would play in some areas, but I think the idea was that, just finding there's so many, what we heard, Democrats in red areas who just don't have a home. They don't have a place to go to where they can get together and, and talk to each other and support each other. And I think that's what, some people saw as a function of a group like Potluck Insurgency, because that's basically what we've been all along. That's how we started. And I think we've retained that, that sense that we're a group of friends that like to get together to share a meal in the old days and a glass of wine or two and talk politics. So, maybe that's something we could think about. But what do you think we could do? I hope we will keep going as the grassroots group. If we do, what are some things that you think that we could take on that would be meaningful? What are your thoughts?
Alan, if you'd like to unmute, I see your hands up.
Yeah, I had a question. First, I wanted to say, I mean, I'm just immensely proud to be part of this group. I mean, you guys did an amazing job. It just is, you know, they could have paid multi-millions to consultants. You did far better than anything I've seen of this nature. And I'm wondering whether you're going to be sharing it with Iowa Democrats, with the leadership, and passing this on, what you found. And also, I'm curious, in the last 2 weeks of the election, I got so frustrated with the campaign over here. I went to work in Wisconsin. I volunteered in Wisconsin, and see what I did? But no, sorry.
It worked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
The short-
but
yeah.
I'm wondering whether could we make connections with surrounding states to see what sort of strategies they've used. Can something like that be done? But first of all, are you going to be passing on the report to up the line, as it were?
Actually, let me hop in as far as the second part of your question. As far as Wisconsin, not only is the new Iowa group working with Georgia, but also Wisconsin, because of what they were doing with their judges. They really have done a tremendous job there too. So there's going to be some communication there too. So
I think Janice was going to comment on our dissemination plan.
Yeah, we have disseminated it broadly and often. We've sent it. It's made its way to every Democratic legislator, thanks to both our efforts and those of other legislators. It's made it to virtually everyone at the top of the IDP. It's gone to the Hughes Project and the New Iowa Project, as well as to obviously all the people we interviewed. And it's gone to a number of media outlets. We did have one interview this past Monday with James Lynch of the Gazette. It hasn't appeared in the Gazette, but a quite decent article appeared in the Quad City Times and one other paper today, I think. So there was written by James Lynch. So
Yeah, it was in the Bleeding Heartland as well.
Yes, and then Emily turned it into an article that went out in Bleeding Heartland. So we're continuing to try and push it out in as many ways as we can. And you are more than welcome to share it as well. The more, the merrier, because the whole point of it is to get it into people's hands and get them to think and act.
there also is a Facebook page for all the chairs of the county parties, and it has been shared with those folks as well. AC, I see you've got your hand up. Next question.
Are you calling on Pat Minor?
Oh, sorry, I went ahead and called on Casey.
Oh, okay, all right.
Pat,
I want you to know that I shared your wonderful report with Ross Wilburn last week, who's as you know, is the chair of the Democratic Party. And he was saying that they have an infrastructure. The Iowa State Democratic Party has about 10 people. And in contrast to the Wisconsin Democratic Party, which has 50. And so it's very hard to reach out as much as they like to. But I think the thing that has interested me is what I call pithy slogans that I hope are bumper sticker worthy or billboard worthy. And I reached out to the whoever the communications director of the Iowa plan or the Iowa Democratic Party is, and that's kind of like where I'd like to focus my efforts. And I suppose that has quite a bit to do with messaging. But you should know that my feeling is that there isn't a lot of common ground, unfortunately, with Republicans. Their idea of common ground has basically eroded. There's very little. And the idea of Democrats being Iowa nice, I think has lost considerable luster, at least for me. And so as a result of that, most of these slogans, and there are like 30 of them, and I enlisted some of my friends, have a kind of feeling to them that they're a little bit like an Iowa Lincoln project. And I think that we've been so busy fending off the Republican slogans of tax and spend, vote non-Democrat, And I see that as taking the battle to them. And so it's more just, bare-fisted politics. It's not mean or anything, but it just calls them out on all the stuff that they've been putting out there. Like, for example, Social Security is not socialism. Or when Democrats lose, they don't attack the Capitol. Or Republicans, brought to you by the Koch brothers.
Love them.
Democrats pay their fair share of taxes. Republicans support ignorance, Democrats support education, etc. I mean, there's 30 of them, and I'll email this to Ed. And my thought is that, I knocked on doors in the last campaign. I'm not particularly mobile right now and won't be for the foreseeable future. But I think that there's a lot of sporting events and things like that where we could have a table and distribute these things on bumper stickers and start spreading them around right now. And I'd be interested if the Potluck Insurgency has other ideas of how to get this kind of information, if you just deem it worthy, or if you want to distance yourself from it, you can do that too. But if you deem it worthy, if there are other outlets for this kind of information, such as billboards and Facebook and whatever else.
Okay, noted. Thank you. That's certainly something that we could propose as a project. I think Pat Miner had a hand up also.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Pat.
She's muted.
You're muted.
sorry, I unmuted myself, but somehow I got muted again. Thank you. I also wanted to say thank you that you've done a wonderful job in putting together this project. I think it's an amazing thing, and I hope it is put to good use. In terms of messaging, I think op-ed pieces and writing things is a great idea. I still think as we get closer to the elections, texting is a better idea than trying to call people. First of all, when you text, you don't need to get a hold of somebody. It goes out quicker. You reach more people, and then they have the information right before them. The other thing I wanted to mention is, in terms of messaging, is the issue-based stuff. And I think that is also very important. That is what I do in the off season. I do write letters to the editor. I write letters to, as I write op-ed pieces, I write to the legislature, all involved with well, 2 particular issues right now. And I think that is another excellent way to get our issues out. I don't usually connect it specifically with the Democratic Party, but I think if anybody looks at the issues, they know that it's the Democratic Party that supports the issues I talk about. And I was wondering if in handwriting things, if writing people on a list would also be get more involvement from people in other counties. One other thing I wanted to say is that, and I wrote it in the chat, but is that Cedar County is right next door here. They are redder than red, and they really could use help from Johnson County, I think. They, when I lived there, we had some incredible candidates that were never viable partly because the state party had no idea how to message things to a local candidate. And so when the candidates would refuse to do what the national party wanted them to do, they'd get kicked off and not get any more money. And I think that was a terrible mistake on the part of the National Democratic Party. but it's also a mistake in terms of, you know, like relational things. Part of the problem there is, I don't know, you know, maybe you guys know, maybe you don't, is that since Johnson County, or I mean Cedar County is basically Republicans, we've always had trouble coming up with a viable Democrat who has lived there a long time. That seems to be a huge issue in Cedar County, is having somebody who's lived there forever. And we've always been transplants.
Yeah.
And that's been part of the problem there.
Thank
So
you, Pat.
that's my
Thank
2
you.
cents.
I want to make sure that anyone who has something they'd like to throw out has time. We don't usually like to go much longer than an hour, and it's about 7:20. So I thank you, Pat. We got notes on all of that. Any other thoughts about activities, projects, speakers you might like the group to have going forward? The steering committee is going to meet sometime next week, and we'll review, you know, all of your comments from tonight and come back to you with some proposals. So what else would you like to have us consider?
I see Leslie has a hand up. Would you like to
Okay.
unmute Leslie and go ahead?
Hi there, guys. So I've been spending a lot of time over at the legislature working on mental health issues and many other issues. And there's a couple of things that strike me. One is there is a huge amount of mean-spirited legislation going on, and we need to go ahead and message about that. We absolutely need to be writing letters to the editor about every single thing that they've done that is heartless, like the housing voucher thing that's going on, like the gun bills. I can't even list them all because there's too many for me to think off the top of my head. And we need to message on that. We need to message simple things like taking away housing from vulnerable Iowans is not Iowa nice. It can be simple. I love the idea of the billboards. I would also say if you're looking to get into new relationships with other organizations, I don't know if any of you have been paying attention to the Interfaith Alliance. They have a Moral Monday talk every Monday at noon that is very good. And there's multiple organizations involved that attend those and contribute to that group. And Connie Ryan, who's the executive director of that, puts out a wonderful legislative update every single week to telling you exactly how to engage for and against bills, the good and bad ones. And that is a group that I would highly recommend we start engaging with much more actively, because I think there's people there from all across the state. And the beauty of that is I have no idea if most of these people are Republicans or Democrats, but they're people that care about human issues. And that's where we need to get ourselves in. We need to be able to have conversations that way. And then in terms of just trying to get people together and build the party, throw events that are just fun and social. Don't have an agenda. Just have get-togethers for the sake of that when we can do that again. So I'll say that, and I love the idea of going with billboards to offset all those nasty ones that are out there. Let's go for it. I'll donate.
Thank you. I think Sarah had a hand up, and then Laura.
Just really briefly building on what Leslie said, as probably you all know, I'm Christina Bohannon's clerk for this session. And so I see the letters that come into her inbox. And it's really good to reach out to legislators. And you can reach out to ones that are not your legislators, just so you know that like they're on the subcommittee for a bill that you really care about, or they're on the committee for a bill you care about. And you write a letter that's personal and specific about why you care about it. So like sort of broadcasting it to everybody, not really all that effective. Form letters, not really all that effective. But if you take the time to target your contact, it really does matter. And we've seen it matter. Like vouchers is still not on the table, school vouchers, because those legislators got so many emails against it. So
let me hop on here with Sarah, because Christina Bohannon sends out a wonderful newsletter every week. She has the talking points, you know, from the moms for demand action. You know, you name it, she has it there. So I know there's several of you on here today that are from red districts, that are from red places. So if you want to get her, that would give you some talking points that you're not going to get from your legislator. So that's Christina Bohannon. And maybe Sarah, could you show her, put that in the chat?
It's in the chat.
I was going to say too, back to Leslie, that I'm on Leslie's Facebook page, and Leslie is a profound testament to the, you know, the efficacy of meeting individually with legislators. I've seen so many pictures of her, many of them Leslie wearing a mask, the Republican legislator not wearing a mask. That's very noticeable. But Leslie, I really admire how you have taken, you know, this approach to, you know, you've made it a way of life. And I think you've met with many people who would not have considered the, you know, the issue that you're thinking about and you're talking about without having met with you personally. So, yeah. Lori Benz, you had a hand up a bit ago.
I did. Thank you for tolerating my absence in the middle of this discussion. I was actually speaking to Christina Bohannon while this was going on, so I missed a lot of it. However, I want to say that I have read every word in your report. I feel that I want to commend all of you for taking this on. A very complicated subject and trying to unspool, if you will, some of the issues, some of the questions that Democrats must address going forward. That said, I want to make a couple of comments. If these have already been made, I apologize because I didn't sit through your earlier conversation, but I will make them anyway. One of the things that your report didn't address, and I understand that the timing might have been different, but that was concerning to me, is that the new Iowa Democratic chair has decided to launch this Hughes Commission. Okay. And it's just what I've read in the paper. I am not engaged in any other kind of information getting that would be in more detail than that. I really think that we are repeating an error in what was reported. And that is, yes, he has selected or asked some very distinguished, notable Democrats to try to figure out what went wrong and what direction might be better. But when I looked at that list, they're people from central Iowa for the most part. We have to get away from the idea that Iowa is Des Moines, the Des Moines area. To me, the representation was unfortunate. It has nothing to do with the qualification, stature, or advice that these people might do. It was all about optics in my mind. It was not a good strategy. Okay, that wasn't in your report. Now back to your report. As I said, I read all of it, and a couple of things stood out to me. That you addressed the question of whether this is going to be a top-down effort or a grassroots relational organizing effort. You addressed that quite clearly, I thought, and I do want to come down on the side of your grassroots approach. The top-down approach has caused a lot of the issues that came up that you documented and that came up. I want to emphasize that while I know your report may not have gone into all the detail that you want, I do want to note that some of your items in the conclusion and path forward, that you look at those closely so they don't take that top-down approach again. Okay, and by that, let me just say this, that you mentioned here in a couple of different places that we need to talk with experts about certain, absolutely, but the experts come in to complement what the Democrats see as their core values and issues. They craft their message, they craft their approach to what we have to tell them. And I just want to make sure that it's not the experts telling the Democrats what to say across the board or across the state. I fully agree with you that local input is extremely important. I would always start a conversation with trying to find where is our common ground? Where's our common ground here? No matter where I'm at, what do we have in common as far as what we want to see out of our life, our quality of life, our state? And that should be fed into our messaging, the kernel of our messaging. That's what I just want to put that out. Another thing that I saw on here about your year-round organizing, I agree. I totally agree that it's got to be consistent, a consistent effort. And one of the things that you said here was that the IDP can start by hiring a permanent statewide organizing director. That's fine. It has to be, though, coordinated with your subsequent bullet point on the focus on communication. One is operational in terms of helping to get campaigns off on the best start or organizing locally and so on. But if the communication isn't a part of that resource, I think that you're dealing with two silos, and you're going to not make the greatest have the greatest outcome for your resource. What I
Hey,
would
Lori,
like-
I'm just gonna jump in and pass this over to Roseanne, because we can't go through the whole thing tonight. So we would love to chat more with you about this, though. Go ahead, Roseanne.
Yeah, I was going to say too, Lori, unfortunately, this group, we can enact a few of the recommendations perhaps in that report, but I'm afraid we are not going to be in a position to be responsible for, many of the actions that we recommend. So I hope you have an opportunity to talk to, others in the IDP and perhaps legislators who might be involved in the Truman Fund or the Senate Majority Fund, people who can take action on some of what's in there. We are running up against the time when I think we should call it a night, but I'm going to ask one more time if there's anything that anyone wanted to say about our group, Potluck Insurgency, and what we might do going forward. We've had some ideas about activities and projects. Is there anything else that you want to throw out before we depart for the evening?
I do see a handout from Becky and Tim. Go ahead.
Okay,
Unmute
great.
yourselves and go ahead.
Great.
It's just quickly, and I understand we're at the end of it, but we think the biggest threat to us is what's going on in Iowa right now. I mean, to the things that we stand for. And somehow I think we need to focus more on what's happening with the Iowa legislature than necessarily some of these national issues, because that from the anti-education things to the, let's give everybody guns to whatever. And I think on a lot of those issues, the majority of Iowans are lining up with us rather than what's going on. And so I hope that as we go forward, we focus more on what we can do to flip Iowa as opposed to our impact on what's going on nationally. That's just a quick comment.
Great. Okay. Anyone else before we take off here? Thank you, Tim. Thanks for that.
I would
Jane,
like
I see
to,
Jane's hand up.
yeah, I would like to agree with Tim. Most people that I know who say they're Republican, if you give them, not that I know really that many, but if you give them the issues, they're really Democrats. They're voting Republican, but these issues, we have the majority. I think it's messaging. And I think we should be talking about the economy. Everybody agrees. You know, what is it? It's the economy, stupid. People want jobs, they want, and we're the ones who do that. We're the ones who are good for the economy, but we never message that. And I don't know why. So that's just my thought is to message what people, the things that people really want, that we know they want for sure. And I love the bare knuckles idea too.
We probably do need more of that, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Anybody else have a hand up or anything over in chat that we should pick up on? There's been some great things in chat tonight, by the way, and we will use that input.
I see Lori's got her hand up.
Lori?
You'll need to unmute.
I'm sorry, I'll make it really fast. I agree that messaging is the core issue here. Your message absolutely needs to have a rural aspect to it. Yes, jobs are important. You need to have a message for jobs in rural areas. If you don't include your messaging for rural areas, I think you're going to see exactly what we got out of this last election. I think, yes, the urban areas are getting the attention when it comes to jobs. What are you going to say to the rural areas besides plant more corn?
Yeah.
Well,
right.
but I think they need jobs too.
Sure.
Of course they need, exactly. But what's your messaging on that? Of course they need jobs.
I think it's prosperity. Well, I won't.
But I think you're making a good point that
I think it's
the message is the
prosperity.
key. So go ahead, Roseanne.
Yeah, well, again, I'm just seeking input here for the steering committee to consider, and certainly, we can talk some more about whether we might want to have a messaging project, a little group of people that would work on messaging for billboards or, whatever the case might be. So the input that we've gotten from Lori and Pat and others tonight will be very useful in that regard. Golly. This has been a very, this hour or so has gone by so quickly. And I really, really love seeing everybody. I'm so glad we could get together, even though it was on Zoom. It was still a pleasure to see all of you and to hear from so many of you. We will be in touch shortly. I hope you will stay involved. There really is a need and an important role for grassroots groups like ours in Iowa. Not just around election time, but every day going forward. So I hope that we are willing as a group to make a commitment to year-round organizing that we can sustain and that will make a contribution to turning things around so that we aren't stuck with this horrible news we get every day out of Des Moines about these heartless bills, as Leslie said, that they're passing day after day. So I think I'm going to close it out. Thank you all for coming. Thanks for the team that worked on the report. It was a pleasure. And we'll see you in another month or so.
Hey,
Goodbye.
great to see you.